So picture this nightmare scenario. You've just spent hours building a brand new integration. You test it locally, it works absolutely flawlessly, you deploy to production, high-five your team, and then nothing. Your users are getting errors, the feature silently breaks, and when you finally dig into the logs, you realize your API key is suddenly returning null. Why? What just happened?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at Laravel config, and specifically, the single environment rule that prevents these exact kinds of production bugs. Our goal today is pretty simple but incredibly transformative. We're going to shift your mindset. We're moving away from that beginner habit of just getting things to work locally, and we're stepping up into architecting bulletproof enterprise-grade Laravel systems.
To get there, here's our playbook for today. First, the silent bug. Second, the golden rule. Third, configuring external services. Fourth, the architect's perspective. And finally, bulletproofing your app. Let's start with part 1, the silent bug. The culprit for this massive headache is usually a command that's actually meant to help you out. PHP artisan config cache. This command compiles every single file in your config directory into one cached PHP file. Now, caching is a massive performance win for production servers, right? Because it skips the work of parsing multiple files on every single request. But doing so completely stops Laravel from reading the .env file entirely. The difference between local and production perfectly illustrates the trap. If you call the env function directly inside a service class or a controller, well, it returns null in production because the cache is completely ignoring the .env file. It works locally, sure, because you aren't caching there, but it fails silently the second it's deployed. The correct, architect-level implementation is to use the config helper. That safely reads from that compiled cache file, no matter what environment you're in.
Which brings us to part 2, the golden rule.
If you take exactly one thing away from this explainer, let it be this mantra. Never call the env helper outside of your config files. That is the entire configuration strategy distilled down into a single sentence. Adhering to this one non-negotiable rule is literally what separates eager beginners from true Laravel architects. If you follow this consistently, you eliminate the silent bug completely. But if you break it even once, you're basically setting a trap for your future self.
All right, part 3, configuring external services.
So if direct env calls are strictly banned in your application code, how does an architect actually organize all these settings? The answer lies in a file Laravel provides right out of the box, config/services.php. This file acts as your central, designated registry for all of your third-party credentials. It ships mostly empty by default, but its entire job is to map your .env variables to structured configuration arrays. So whether you're using Stripe, Twilio, AWS, whatever, you register those credentials right here. Then, throughout your application, you simply call config services.stripe.secret. Just one file to open, one place to look.
But architecture is all about making the right choices as your app scales. So when do you use services.php versus creating a brand new config file? It's pretty straightforward. Simple key-value pairs absolutely belong in services.php. You don't want to overcomplicate things by making a stripe.php file just for 2 keys. However, if you're building a really complex feature domain, maybe like an AI knowledge base or a custom error reporter that needs 5 or more distinct settings, well, that's when it deserves its own dedicated namespace and its own config file. Keep it clean, keep it logical.
Moving into part 4, the architect's perspective.
A true Laravel architect doesn't sit around waiting for a user to trigger an error. They fail early. One incredibly powerful yet totally underused technique is validating required config at boot, right in your app service provider. You can write a really simple method that checks if critical keys are present the second the application starts up. If your app absolutely cannot function without that Stripe secret or a specific API token, check for it during the boot process.
Just think about the alternative for a second, a runtime error. You get this cryptic null pointer exception buried deep in a stack trace, and it usually happens while a real customer is actively trying to give you money. It is an absolute nightmare to debug. Compare that to a boot error. You get an immediate, descriptive warning the literal second you deploy or start your server, telling you exactly which environment variable is missing. The architect chooses the boot error every single time. Another hallmark of the architect's perspective is how you handle your documentation. You've got to treat your .env.example file as living documentation. Include every single variable your application can use and add explanatory comments right above them. But crucially, never commit real production values to this file.
A new developer should be able to read that example file, instantly understand what every single setting does, and get their local environment running without having to tap anyone on the shoulder.
Finally, Part 5, Bulletproofing Your App.
We've covered the theory and the architecture, so let's get highly practical. Here is the exact, systematic procedure to eradicate this silent bug from your projects forever. Step 1, do a global search and hunt down all those env calls lurking in your controllers, services, and middleware. Step 2, move those variables into config/services.php or their appropriate config file. Step 3, replace those raw calls in your codebase with the config helper function. And finally, step 4, run php artisan config.clear followed by config.cache in your local environment. Doing this rebuilds the cache and proves right then and there that your code survives without reading the .env file directly.
So I want to leave you with one final question to think about. If you ran php artisan config-cache right now, today, would your application actually survive? Or are there silent bugs just hiding in your codebase, waiting to explode on your next production deployment? I challenge you to apply what we've covered today. Go audit your own work immediately. Implement the golden rule and start architecting Laravel applications that never fail silently.